want answers? I think I'm entitled. You want answers? I want the truth. You can't handle the truth.
We are the Mad Men of Masculinity.
Your home for healthy masculinity. We're just real men having real conversations for you.
Good day, Madman Mafia.
What's happening? I am Kirk M. Samuels.
And I am Jason B. Kendrick.
And we are the Mad Men of Masculinity.
That's right. We're just real men having real conversations for you.
We've probably done that intro hundreds of times by now at this point.
Oh, it's been more than that.
Yeah. For real?
Yeah. Probably 300,
What
400.
would you guess? For real?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I would say so. Yeah, I would say so. Something like that.
Some close to that.
You know, something close to that, man. We got kind of a cloudy, overcast, rainy day here, man. It's just one of them kind of days in the Mile High City as we're recording this thing. So it's one of them days where you got to say, hey, wake up, man. You got to get with it.
Yeah.
Man.
Got to get up and keep it going. Keep it moving. I don't care how tired you are. I want to take a nap, but, I'm still here.
Yeah. Speaking of keeping it going, keeping it moving, as we are recording this, it happens to be the week leading up to a holiday in America, one of the big holidays on our calendar, one of the red letter, red number days on the calendar of the year, and that is Memorial Day, man. It's Memorial Day coming up, man. Memorial Day weekend, the unofficial, I guess, start of summer as we tend to know it. Back in the day, that was the weekend you get out of school, and then the weekend you go back to school is Labor Day. It ain't that way no more, man. Now it's got the school schedules all kind
of the schedule's all over the place. We go back to a regular schedule, so we know what's going on, and got to give these parents some more breaks because these summer schedules is crazy.
Yeah. But Memorial Day is more than just that unofficial holiday. Memorial Day in itself, I always kind of cringe a little bit on Memorial Day weekend because a lot of times, people who generally don't necessarily know better will like thank a veteran on Memorial Day or honor, veterans and service members and all that kind of stuff. And I get kind of cringy because, I always think like, man, if somebody is here to hear you say thank you, the holiday is actually not for them.
Yeah, no, that's a holiday for those who didn't make it. So yeah, for a lot of us veterans, it's appreciated. When you say thank you for your service, and all that. But for us, that was just what we did, and so it's kind of awkward. But especially on Memorial Day, so make sure you know that on Memorial Day, it's not about those who survived; it's about those who didn't make it, and that's why we're doing this episode because what do you do with that? When you have brothers, because main reason not to be hard on anybody or come down on anybody and don't say happy Memorial Day to a veteran. It's not about being wrong really, but it's about the effect it has because many veterans, especially war veterans, lost people, and so for them Memorial Day is a sacred day, and then you say thank you for your service, and then it brings up that thought of who they lost, their brothers in arms, and who didn't make it back, and so it's just something we want you to be aware of before you can upset somebody and they might be having a bad day because they're in the middle of grief and loss, and you didn't mean to, but you did.
Right. And it's one of those things that in actuality, it's a somber kind of a day. If you look at the history of Memorial Day, it was really kind of born just after the Civil War. And I think it was like Waterloo, New York, or someplace like that, where they call it Decorations Day, where they would go and back then it was May 30th. They would go and they would decorate the go to like the cemetery or whatever and decorate the graves to remember those primarily who died during the Civil War. And then over time it evolved, and after World War II, it just became basically all all people that have died, in all the different wars. And I think in the late '60s, early '70s, it became the fourth or the last Monday of May, where we honor Memorial Day. But either way, the whole point is to remember, remember those that have gone on, and whether you're a veteran and you had a buddy that you lost on the battlefield, or you had just somebody in your life maybe that you lost. I mean, the whole idea, and especially, with May being Mental Health Awareness Month, it's one of those times where we can stop and we can check in on, the people that are going through that process, the people that are observing the holiday for really what it is, and that's the loss of somebody. So in that process, you got to look at the whole idea of grief.
Yeah. I mean, grief is a fact of life. I mean, death is just much a part of life as birth and, living life. What does he say? There's a birthday, a dash, and then there's another date. And it's that dash that's the most important. And for all of us, it's a good time to reflect and realize that, that death being a part of life doesn't make it less meaningful, it makes it more meaningful. If we
Yeah.
all live forever and there was no end, it would give it less meaning. And and to some philosophies we do. We live forever, but we don't live forever in the same body. We don't live forever in the same consciousness. And so yeah, they may have not made it back, and they may still be going on, but that doesn't mean that you don't grieve. Every one of us has
Yeah.
lost somebody or many somebodies, and there
Mhm.
is grief involved. And especially for guys, being that we've been told all our lives to suck it up and to, be strong and don't let anybody see you cry, don't be weak. There comes a time, and Memorial Day is one of those great days where I think we should make it very acceptable to be weak as men, to especially veterans, and to show that emotion, to let it out, because part of grief is going through the emotion. You have to go through it and feel it to heal it. But when we don't, and we don't acknowledge it, it turns into something, it could be cancerous or sickness or something. I mean, that emotion, there's that great book, The Body Tells the Score. And all your emotions and all your experiences are stored in your body, and the only way to get them out so that they don't cause some sort of sickness
Mhm.
or some sort of illness is to feel it and to let it process. And Memorial Day is a great day to do that, but it takes some awareness from everybody else. It also takes some bravery from those that are in grief, because whether it's
Mhm.
a veteran coming home who's lost his buddies, or it's just you and a parent's sick and on their way out, or a friend. I mean, people are checking out left and right. And so we all have that experience of grief, and it's just a part of life. But so many of us resist it. We resist
Yeah.
it. And part of the issue with that is not only do we not heal, does it make us sick, but then you miss the beauty, you miss the love, because the grief is just the love underneath. It's that expression of love. If you didn't love that person, if you didn't feel for that person, you wouldn't grieve that person. And that's why we say, what do you do with that? How do you honor somebody and still move on? How can you honor somebody's passing and grieve them, and then still move forward and still make, live for that person or because of that person, before yourself? There's so many ways you can do it, and think about it. But the main thing is to know that it's you're not unique. You're not on an island. We all grieve. We all deal with death and sickness throughout the life. And so, just accepting that, and maybe even having a plan or just some sort of awareness around it is probably a good thing.
Mhm. And to your point, as men commonly, we don't have safe spaces to grieve. Um, as men commonly, when there is loss, when there is a loss, normally, if you're involved or if it was close to you at all, normally you are part of holding up the space for other people. Um, literally carrying the weight of that. Every funeral I've ever been to, all the pallbearers were men, right? So, literally carrying the weight of that loss, carrying the weight of that, of that grief is part of who we are called to be on, called on to be, or are thrust into us, man. And so a lot of times we don't have really safe spaces to just let go and to break and you know and we all need that sometimes. We all need to acknowledge that those times exist. We need to acknowledge that, we can be strong, but man, you watch Navy SEALs when one of their own, when you watch Navy SEALs talk about Operation Red Wings, when that whole thing happened, the biggest loss in their community history, that, those toughest guys will break down. And, when they think about their buddies that they live life with that don't get to come home the same way they get to come home. Even those tough guys, those warriors, they still, have to find space to grieve that and to grieve that in a healthy way. Because if they don't, then they end up, you know, realizing at some point, man, they got some stuff in them, some proverbial demons in them that are just eating them alive from the inside out. And what do you do with that? You got to have a place for that. And so as men, we got to acknowledge the fact that sometimes there's times to be weak. There's times to let it out. There's times to break in healthy ways. And to me, one of the healthiest ways is when you can break or be weak. And when you're in and with a community that allows it to be a safe space to do that. But we got to be able to talk about these things in any case.
Yeah, it's something that's necessary, just like the grieving process. And if you've not had the experience, if you're still white knuckling it and holding on for dear life and trying to keep everything in, there's therapists out there, there's breathwork people out there that I've done some work in the past, and it's a good thing for every man to do because we carry so much, and a lot of it is unconscious. We carry so much unconscious weight and so many emotions that in the past when I've done some of this work, it was just I think it was a breathwork therapist or something, but he was asking me questions about my dad. And of course, for most men, that's a sensitive button. And I started bawling and releasing, and then it was like this pause. I would go through like a layer of emotion, and then I would get to this pause where I was okay, and I would breathe, and then there'd be another layer underneath that, and then there'd be a pause and like a break. And so when you stuff it down, it's not going anywhere. You're making, shale of emotions. You're making layer cake of emotions within you. And that stuff turns to rot. It turns to disease and cancer. And so for your own health, so that you can stay around, so that you can be part of those that help others through grief, so that you can be of service to others. You've got to take care of yourself as well. And part of taking care of yourself is giving yourself permission and allowing yourself to release, to break down, to be human. So many of us have just forgotten that we're humans with emotions, and that's part of being human is that we've got to release. We've got to allow it to flow through us. We've got to feel the feelings, and you can only stuff it so long before it backs up on. It's like, you can flush all you want to down the toilet, but at some point it's going to back up, and then you need some real help to clog, clear that clog. And it's a really bad analogy, but that's kind of what we do is, man, is we just shove it down there and try to flush it and ignore it, and then it comes back up. And yeah, speaking of coming back up, probably time for us to take that first break. So we'll be right back. We're the Mad Men of Masculinity right here on KLDC. That was not my best segue.
No, that was actually, I was wondering how you was going to get there. You got there. I knew you would get there. I was wondering how you was going to get there.
I just looked up and I was like, oh, it's time for a break. So, yeah.
Boom. Boom, boom. All right, let's keep rocking.
All right.
Here we go. We're back.
Yes, we're back.
Mad Men of Masculinity, KLDC, 12:20 a.m. in the Mile High City and on the interwebs everywhere. We're having one of those real conversations, man. This is real talk, kind of one of them real talk kind of days here at the Mad Men, with the Mad Men Mafia. Just kind of having grown up kind of talk, man. And so, man, I I knew we would get there. I didn't think we would get there like in the second segment here, but I want to pick up right where you left off. Um, right where you left off, kind of, or someplace you touched on anyway in the last segment. And like I said, I knew we would get there, but I was just curious when we would. Um, and that is a man and his father.
Mhm.
In this the cycle and this topic and where that comes in, Memorial Day, remembering grief, all those kinds of things. When I was 23 years old, almost just literally just getting married for the first time, about to become a dad, all these this transitional period in life. Um, my father passed away at 46. He was 46 years old. Um, and come to find out, his father died when he was 46, and his father died, and then his father died even before that. And so, anyhow, but yeah, I found myself literally like a week after my wedding, at a funeral, and the funeral was my dad's, and so I went from my dress whites one weekend to, my dress blues the very next weekend. And so I'm just wondering, I know the answer to this, but I'm just wondering, can you relate to that story at all?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it wasn't exactly that time frame. My dad lasted till he was
Right.
63, but very similar. And of course, for like most guys, our father wound is probably one of the biggest things we need to address and heal to become the best versions of ourselves. Because the man who was our God, the man who was our model for manhood, and whether he was good, bad, or indifferent, he was still that guy. And so we have to address that at some level, or in probably many levels, to get to being the best version of ourselves. So many of us hold ourselves back consciously and unconsciously because of dad in one way or another.
Yeah, I mean, and that is, like I said, I knew the answer to that. We've so in other words, I mean, point is, we both have experienced and continue to experience, because it's a daily experience. But um, having lost a father, and and all of the ups and downs, everything involved with that, and in that, I'll at least speak for myself. I won't speak for you, but in that, there's some doors that will never be closed, and some doors that will never be open. There's some things that are left undone. There's just so many things to process in that whole thing, man. I remember, you talked about the whole breathwork thing. I remember being at a weekend. Um, uh, I don't know. I don't. It wasn't like a weekend retreat, but it was like a weekend event for this men's group, and part of we went through all these different kind of exercises, and part of one of the exercises we went through was to express anger in a healthy way, and they had different stations kind of around the room, and one of them was like you could yell at something, and the other one was like you could take a tennis racket at a pillow, and then the other one I forgot, but then there was one where there was like a mannequin, and they would give you punching, like the boxing gloves, and you could basically just unleash on this mannequin. And so I chose the mannequin, the mannequin station, I guess you can say. And man, long story short, and when it was my turn to go, I I envisioned that being my father, and I literally blacked out. I woke when I kind of came to. I was on the floor straddling this boxing dummy. It was one of the ones that does, it's like the head and the torso,
Yeah.
but no arms, and then it had like the stick at the bottom and the base. I was straddling the torso of this thing, and I was just like wailing away with these boxing gloves at this. And I think I was like choking it, and I mean, just all kinds of stuff, man. I just went red, and just kind of, I literally came to, and I felt like the whole room was looking at me and like, whoa, what's up with this dude? Um, But man, I processed so much through that exercise. But my whole point is in this long diatribe is that in the grief process, in the loss process, in the memorial process of our father, and or it could be father wound. There could be so many things tied up in that for men that a lot of us don't even cross that bridge when in life in terms of dealing with that.
Yeah, I mean, it actually just came to mind that maybe using Memorial Day is a great day, especially if you don't have a father in your life or your father's passed, and use that yearly. Because to your point, it's a layer cake. There's layers to it. There's many aspects to it, and being aware of and actually addressing the father wound or the issues, because it's one of those things. I mean, you'll do all this work and you'll go to therapy and you do breath work and you'll cry it out and you'll beat up the dummy and go to the break room and like break everything and get all that emotion and anger out you think. And then later on, something will trigger you. You'll be watching a movie, you'll see a commercial, you'll hear a song, and then you just lose it. And that's that next layer, that next motion. And I mean, it goes all the way back to childhood. We've got some of us 50, 60 years worth of pent up emotions and things that we're not really aware of because we've been trained to unconsciously stuff. And to be the healthiest, best version of ourselves, we have to be able to adapt and overcome and deal with those emotions. I think it was Brene Brown talking about in her books about shame and resilience, that the most resilient people are those who can actually accept and acknowledge what they're feeling and let it pass through them versus stuffing it down. And they have practice. I mean, it's like any other skill you practice, which means you probably need to start with a therapist or, someone to help you initially to break through. Cause we put so much armor around us and armor around our heart that you need help to get to a place where you can actually penetrate that armor or even open it up a crack so you can get in there and let some of that pressure out. So find some help and then make it a practice. Sometimes it's good to what that movie makes you cry. That movie gets you all choked up. So nobody else is around. I got the house to myself. I'm gonna watch that movie. I need to open that vent a little bit. I need to crack the seal a little bit, let off some pressure because it's just cathartic. And for most of us men, it's something we don't get to do. It's normal and natural. All women are allowed to, and they cry openly and easily, and that's fine. But most of us men are not allowed to and don't allow ourselves. And so it's something we need to take on as a challenge for each of us to be brave enough to find a space that we consider safe to release those
Mhm.
emotions and to process those things. Otherwise, they're going to end up killing us.
That was probably, that experience that I just talked about, probably one of the, if not the most pivotal moment in my life to finally cross that bridge and finally face that dragon. Because up to that point in my life, I had been, I'd had this I'm saying metaphorically speaking, a dragon just over my shoulder, breathing its hot, fiery breath down on my neck my entire life, and I would never turn around to face that thing. I would never turn around, and some of that goes back to some things from my childhood in terms of my relationship with my father that I would never face, I would never confront, and of course, never will have the opportunity to. But being able to handle that that way, being able to process that, being able to go through that and to cross that bridge and to turn around and face that dragon um, head on, even in a ugly, tearful. I mean, it wasn't outright rage, but it was a safe space where I could do that, man. That was so pivotal and so healing for my life that it literally changed everything from that point going forward. And I'm sure whenever which ironically the next, I don't know if you call it major holiday, but the next holiday that we'll celebrate is Father's Day, right here in a few weeks. And so, and I'm sure when we get to that point, I'll circle back to this, but I wouldn't be able to forgive my father if I didn't go through that day and that experience in that room surrounded by other guys. Like I wouldn't been able to forgive him, you know, post mortem if it wasn't for that day. But you got to be able to process these things, man. That's my whole point. You got to be able to deal with these things. You got to be able to to face and confront it, to experience the experience, even if the experience is painful.
Yeah. Yeah, it's the processing, I mean, it's almost the first step you have to acknowledge. And sometimes we won't even acknowledge because we don't know. We've spent all of our lives stuffing and all of our lives covering and masking and soothing. And so we're not even sure what's in there. And for most of us, I know for me especially, and I know a lot of guys that we work with say the same thing. It's like there's a fear for most men to go there because you're like, well, if I
Mhm.
go there, I may never stop, or if I open
Mhm.
that tap, that emotion may never stop. I may never stop crying. But just so
Mhm.
you will. You'll find some peace, but it will feel overwhelming because you didn't have the practice in the past. You didn't have the skills to process the emotions, but you need to. And when you acknowledge those emotions, acknowledge that you may have them, and you take the steps to start to process them and feel them and allow them to come through you, is when you can get to that forgiveness. Because the forgiveness isn't about your father. It's not about those who traumatized you. It's about yourself. You're forgiving them knowing that they're just a human being doing the best they can. And it puts them in a new light, but it's for you to forgive them because until you forgive them, you're still a victim of them. I don't care how long they've
Yeah.
been dead. I don't care how long they've been gone. If you can't forgive that man, if you can't forgive yourself, if you can't process those emotions, they're still running you. That little boy inside you that got traumatized at 4, 5, 6 years old by dad being drunk and beating on you or beating on mom or whatever the scenario might have been, whatever traumatized you, that's the one running the show. So for you to be the best version of yourself you can be, you've got to practice forgiveness of yourself, of them. You got to practice processing the emotions, feeling it to healing it. You've got to allow yourself to free yourself. You got to, if freedom is a priority for you, we live in the US and freedom is one of our biggest, anchors and priorities. We want that pursuit of happiness, that liberty, but you can't give yourself liberty if you're still a slave to your emotions and a slave to those traumas that have been running your life. And speaking of
Mhm.
running our lives, it's time for us to run our second break here. So we hope you'll come right back to us. We're the Madmen of Masculinity.
Mhm.
This is KLDC.
Nice. Man, that's a tough one, man. That's a tough one for a lot of guys, man. That's a tough one for just us in general, man, being able to deal with that,
Yeah.
you know,
Well, and so
and,
many
and
guys are just
especially,
unaware. It's like you don't know what you don't know, and you haven't gone there, and you
yeah,
spend all your time unconsciously running from it. And then one day,
right,
somebody, you crack that door open, you're like, it's like that you go to grandpa's house and you go in the attic and you're supposed to clean it out after he passed away, and you see 60 years
yeah,
worth of junk. Well, guess
yeah,
what? You got an attic too. You got a basement.
yeah,
You got places that you've been storing stuff you need to clear out.
yeah. And I mean, to your point, um, to your point, we got to be able to. You got to know that you can't be afraid of opening that thing up and what might be behind it. But we are. I mean, we're afraid of like, man, if I open that up, I might go, I might
It
make the
might be it.
news. You know what I'm saying? Like, that might be the day it all. Like here it is. That might be the day where this is how it ends. This is how it all concludes. And so that's why it's important to have a safe space. That's why it's important to have a safe group. I mean, I know that day if I would have went off and started, trying to break windows or something outside of the confines of that exercise, the people that were there would have guided me back, kind of thing. They let me go within that space and they let me go deep. But
Yep.
but that's why it's important to be surrounded by good people when you do that.
Yep. Let's talk about that. Let's bring it back.
Yeah. We're back, Madman of Masculinity, KLDC 1220 AM in the Mile High City on the interwebs everywhere. You can check us out. Check your boys out. Facebook, YouTube. Man, TikTok reels will pop up every now and then. All kinds of stuff. But it's so funny to, see people like and even make little comments on the what do you call them? The not shorts or the reels or
Yeah, the
whatever.
real
Whenever the little snips, whatever the
TikToks.
short
Yeah,
little
the
segments
TikTok
are.
man.
Yeah, sure, one of those. But it's always cool, like which one of those pop up and just random stuff. We were talking about just here during the break for the radio folks, the idea of making sure that you have and are within a safe space when you go there, when you go to that dark place, because a lot of times we don't go to that dark place because we're afraid of what that dark place holds and the dark place within us. And we know most of us, if we're really honest with ourselves, that man, there's violence within. Like, I have the capability if I were to go unchecked to make the news, and so a lot of us don't like to go there because, man, I don't, what if I explode, and the whole point behind that was making sure you have a safe space, make sure you got safe people, a safe room, and all that, and even if that's therapy, even that's with a therapist helping you walk through that. Again, mental health awareness month. um Somebody helping you walk through or walking alongside you as you walk through that process is so important.
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to the if you don't vent, if you don't let some of the pressure off, then you will explode. And that's why we say this is something you need to make, a ritual annually, make it something more common than those random times where you just can't hold it together anymore and then you just break down. Go talk to somebody, have your voice. That's why we promote Be Men and men's groups, so hard because even if you don't go there, even if you're not talking real deep, dark stuff, just being around the guys and talking will make you feel better. And you can mention
Mhm.
certain things, or somebody else will bring up something, and you can kind of vent a little bit through them, kind of vicariously, or just know that it's not, you're not there battling this thing alone. That dragon is not just yours, that's all mankind's dragon. But when you don't talk about it, when you don't vent it, that's when these things happen, where those things that you're afraid of I may blow up and cause damage and may go off and you know do something horrific. It's because it's built up too much, and now it's like anything else. You let it build up so much that the container breaks, and then all that pressure comes out. Now it's out of control. You're out of control. But when you have a safe space, when you have something and a group that you can talk to and be around and know you're not alone and know that you create this life through your thoughts, beliefs, and actions. And if you're having trouble, and that's one of the things for me, most of my life, up until probably 30, even maybe past that, like I was just confused. I'm like, well, why am I struggling so much? Everybody else seems to have it together. I didn't have crazy abuse. I didn't have crazy trauma. I didn't have all these things. And so, I knew this guy who got beat and that guy who went to jail and this guy who did this and that, but I didn't have any things. But when you don't feel safe in your home as a child, whether that's from an abusive parent, an absentee parent, emotionally abandoning parent, that's still the same feeling of I'm not safe. And that causes
Mhm.
PTSD and complex PTSD and these things. And that's where you need to have help and support and make it a
Mhm.
lifelong journey of getting to know yourself more. Most of us don't even
Mhm.
realize how much we hold on to. No, no, most of us don't realize how much trauma we deal with day to day or how much we're holding in until we find that safe space, until we get some guys around us, until we start to talk and break that seal. But if you haven't broken the seal, and I'm not talking about at the bar
Mhm.
after a few beers, I'm talking broken through that attic or that basement or that place that you store all those
Mhm.
things and started cleaning that
Mhm.
out, that's gonna come back to haunt you. It's something we as men
Yeah.
nowadays especially, we need to take it on ourselves as a responsibility and be brave enough to look at those things because we're not healthy and we're not safe when we haven't dealt with those things.
Yeah, the most broken version of me as a man is when I'm living uh, subconsciously, purely in self defense mode of that little wounded boy in the closet. And that little wounded boy in the closet was wounded by my father. And and so indirectly, me trying to protect him from somebody that and something that doesn't a danger that doesn't exist anymore was not serving me. It wasn't serving my family. It wasn't serving my friends, my life, my health, none of that kind of stuff. And so to be able to deal with the loss and to be able to deal with the grief and to be able to deal with all that, as you were talking, I got a picture I tend to think in pictures. I got a picture in my mind of a submarine. The submarine is most vulnerable when it's on the surface, right? I mean, that's when it's susceptible to the winds and the waves and the weather. That's also when it's most susceptible to attack from above, or even on the surface. But that's when it's most exposed. Well, the only way the sub can go deep where it's safer is to vent out the ballast tanks and to vent out the excess air that's keeping it on the surface. And that's us as men. The deeper places in life are are oftentimes the safest places we can be in terms of, just living deep with purpose, living deep with friendships and relationships, and just living just in the depths of life. But the only way you could get there a lot of times is to vent, to be able to get off of the surface and get below the surface where you're not susceptible to the hurricanes and all that kind of stuff that can exist on top. And so, we ought to live purposely. And one of those ways that we live purposely is to be able to vent, to be able to speak to somebody, to be able to talk about the loss and the grief. And some of those losses might be career losses. I mean, it might be relationship losses. It might be, you know, just failures in life. I mean, whatever that might be. Some of those losses might be, the way you just drove off the tee on the fifth tee box.
Yeah.
But and for anybody that's golfers, it's like you got to be able to let that go. You can get mad and all that kind of stuff, but man, if you're still dealing with that on the sixth tee box, then you're playing the last hole on the next hole.
Yeah.
And so, that's just another metaphor for life, man. We got to be able to let that stuff go, and the best way to let that stuff go, man, is to be able to vent and to release that grief.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, one of the things you need to deal with and one of those failures is just aging sometimes. I mean, you get up in the morning
Mhm.
and you're like, I can't do what I used to do. I used to be able to do this and now I can't do that. I wake up in the morning, sound like Cracker Jacks and all my joints are popping. And, that's something that we all have to deal with, but it's something that we have to accept and acknowledge. And that's where the power comes in. I do the shadow work and inner child work because that's where the power comes from. When you don't acknowledge these things, you're a victim to them. When you don't deal with these things, you don't vent those emotions, you don't address those traumas and those issues, those voices in your head, all those different things, then you become a victim to them. And so if you have anger issues, if you struggle staying committed or being disciplined, like most men, we tend to do good for a bit and then we fall off because there's some voice in us telling us we're not good enough, or that's not us, or there's something else inside of us that says, no, we can't do that because that would make us better. And so there's these voices and these parts of us that we have to address. And until we address them, we're vulnerable. Just like Kirk was saying, you're the submarine on top of the water, not down in it. And once you're down in it and you accept these things, then they become a superpower. Now, no longer can somebody just make a comment and set you off. No longer can somebody make fun of you and call you some names and just set you off. When you do this work, when you know yourself, when you're taking care of that inner child and reparenting it and loving it like it was like you never had when you were actually a child, that's where the inner power and strength comes from. That's when you become foundational. That's when you become bulletproof because you know who you are, and you know that no matter what anybody else thinks, that has nothing to do with you. You know you.
Mhm.
You know what you're
Mhm.
good at. You know where, what you believe in, and you know where you're going. That doesn't have anything to do with anybody else. But we're always victims, especially men and young men, especially. I mean, very much especially, are victims to these fears inside of us because somebody makes some comment, talk about your mama or something, and then you get into a fight, and then you go to jail, and then there's all these issues that could have been dealt with if you had some more self-awareness, had some more foundation, and were a little more grounded, and you didn't allow what other people think and the winds of change and life to knock you off your pedestal. You have the
Mhm.
ability to be a superhuman, but you have to deal with all those things inside you because the
Mhm.
issue is if somebody says something to you and you get upset, some part of you believes that. If I call you a
Mhm.
blue dinosaur and you're like, I am a blue dinosaur, well, you don't believe that. But then if somebody says, well, you're a failure, you're not good enough, and you believe that and you get upset, some part of you believes that, and that's a key and a trigger and a map
Mhm.
to where you need to go to heal that.
Yeah. This is a little bit of a slant on the topic, but in terms of loss and grief and all those kinds of things, us as as men, a lot of times we're attached to our vocation, we're
Mhm.
attached to our job. One of the first questions when two guys get together is, "What do you do?" Right? I mean, what is that? What do you do for a living? What's your job? And I've experienced it multiple times in life. You show up to work like every other day, and all of a sudden they hand you a box and say, company's doing layoffs, and
My from you say
thanks
thank you so
for
much.
thanks for no thanks. Here's your last paycheck. Here's the envelope from HR. There's a phone number and a letter in there, and everything you need to know. And see ya.
Yep.
Most recently, shoot, it happened a couple few years ago, I think it was. And you talk about another form of grief and loss and all that kind of stuff, man. I mean, and the messaging that comes along with that, the value that a lot of men get out of that, and all of a sudden you have nothing. All of a sudden, I don't mean as much as I thought I meant to the company. You mean to tell me I've been trying to do my best this whole time with all these performance reviews, et cetera, and all that. Then all of a sudden you realize it ain't show friends, it's show business, right? And when it comes down to it, you're lying on a spreadsheet, and when you fall, below or above some line, all of a sudden you're on the street. And again, that's another avenue for a lot of guys that we may come across to experience. What about grief and loss in our professional lives? Same thing. All of these things still apply. It's all wrapped up in that. And then when we come back from this next segment here, we'll get into the stages of grief, the 5 stages of grief, and we'll close it out on some answers as opposed to just some questions. So we're going to roll with that, man, and take us our last break here. We are the Mad Men of Masculinity. This is KLDC, and well, I'll let you in a minute. We'll be right back. Um, Man, I'm telling you, that's a game changer. You talk about
Well, I
you
mean, it's
talk about
true. Like
all of a sudden,
every part of life has its own grief. Like you think about,
yeah,
you grow up and you go from one age to the next. There's some grief in becoming older and doing different things. You get out in the business world. You have kids, and then the kids grow up and leave the house. There's grief there. I mean, life is just full of
yeah.
grief, and we got to deal with it.
Yeah, man. I'm telling you, it comes in many forms, but it's still the same,
Hmm.
mostly the same in all of these forms.
Yeah,
It it's very very similar in terms of, especially with the stages of grief. So
yeah. Let's
we'll
talk
finish
about that.
there. All right.
And we're back. Mad Men of
Yeah.
Masculinity, KLDC, right here in the Mile High City and on the interwebs,
Mhm.
everywhere. Talk about grief,
Mhm.
loss, and legacy, people. We're near Memorial
Yeah.
Day, which, if you didn't know, if you didn't see the first segment, if you're just tuning in now, Memorial Day is not the day to thank your veterans, because Memorial Day is about those veterans that didn't make it back. And so it's a day to grieve, it's a day to reminisce, it's a day to honor. It's not a day to thank.
Yeah. And as we're talking about grief, we would just kind of, we never really have a plan for the conversations. We just tend to go, spend a whole bunch of time on you know, on kind of the father journey of that. I'm sure here in a few weeks we'll come back to fatherhood and Father's Day, et cetera, et cetera. But as we talk about grief, there's the stages of grief that are important to know. The stages of grief, whether it's a loss of a career, a loss of a person, a loss of a relationship, a loss of, I don't know, if you're a Dallas Cowboy fans, the loss of your team. Um, I just, yeah, I got to make fun of Cowboy fans, but it's the stages of grief, man, and one way to remember it is DABDA, denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. And, of those things, between denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance, they're circular, right? And if you look into the stages of grief, they're not sequential. They don't go in order. They can show up at any time, and they can circle back to one another. So it's really chaotic in terms of the experience. But generally speaking, those are different stages that you go through as you experience grief or loss of any way in anything, any area of your life. You generally find those five stages in all their forms.
Yeah, I mean, a great example of, I mean, we talk about grief and we're talking about Memorial Day, and which means usually somebody's passed on, and so that's huge grief. But we deal with grief in so many areas, and usually deal with it daily. I mean, think about the process you go through when you realize you got a flat tire. You're driving down the road, you hear the thing going thump thump, and all of a sudden you're mad, you're like, I don't believe this mess, and rah, rah, and then you're like, nah, it's okay. No, it'll be all right. We'll make it. And then you're like, okay, you get a little more into the acceptance of it, but the depression of it. Now I got to stop. Now I'm gonna be late. Now I got to get out in this weather and change this tire, and I got to you know, do all the things. And so we think that grief is this foreign concept. We think that grief is only about the loss of a parent or a loved one, or the loss of a job. We can sometimes accept that, but for the most part, we only associate grief with death. But we grieve
Mhm.
daily. I mean, sometimes you run out of soda or you run out of tea when you still thirsty. Now you're grieving tea. You
Mhm.
were dating some girl and maybe it didn't go well. Now you're grieving that. And I mean, there's so many stages and opportunities for grief, but we tend to only treat it as, oh, grief is just about death. But we grieve daily and sometimes multiple times a day. You might grieve the weather. Like, it was sunny just the other day. I was out playing golf. I got sunburned. And now today it's winter again. I'm like, what's going on? I could be out enjoying the sun, but no, it's half snowing, half raining, half sleeting, windy, cold, and it's I can grieve that. But we tend to, especially as men, not accept grieving because that's emotion, that's feeling, that's girl stuff. But we're human beings and we need to be better men by learning to be brave and learn to grieve more successfully, which means
Mhm.
acknowledging it and getting to acceptance faster. I mean, the most resilient people in the world are those who can get to acceptance very quickly. Like, okay, this thing has happened. I'm not going to argue with reality. I'm just going to do what I need to do to take care of this. And then I'll be much happier when I deal with it, fix this tire, or get a new job, or whatever the case may be. Well, we need to stop
Mhm.
just thinking that grief is only about death.
Yeah, I mean, I remember going through the stages of grief, walking out of a courthouse, and all of a sudden I'm not married anymore. I mean, like I said, I remember the stages of grief, walking out of a job with a box of the stuff that I had at my desk. I mean, there's so many situations that I can vividly remember going through all of the stages of grief of just the process. And it is a process, and there's no real timeline to it. If I think back to it, sometimes I still get a little frustrated at all of those. Sometimes, I can still go back to the experience of loss of various ways. And, man, I think about the last, I would say, most significant family loss that I had was my grandmother a few years ago. And, I sometimes even now, I might, as a matter of fact, last Thanksgiving, I found myself cooking and, I just, man, it just hit me, that, man, I was making a dish that my granny used to make. And, just that it came back up for me. It didn't come back up for me with the same level of, intensity. But either way, it's a process. And over time, you just kind of learn how to ride the wave. I was telling somebody, earlier today that, man, life comes in waves, and the trick is learning how to surf.
Yep.
You don't fight the wave, you just learn how to surf and ride the wave and experience the experience.
Yeah, I mean, one of the good analogies I've always tried to use once I heard it and learned it was that life is a spiral. It's not linear,
Mhm.
it's not a straight line, it's a spiral, so things will come back around. But if you have done your work and you have felt it and gone through the stages of grief and you have learned something from it, then the next time it comes back around, like you said, it's not as intense. And then you get to learn something else from it because there's layers to everything. And then, it's like the old saying of, books don't change, information doesn't change, you change. And so when something comes back around, you've changed and you've grown and you've learned. And so now you're going to get something new out of that. That's why so many people, they can read the same book for 30, 40, 50 years. And each time they read it, they get something else out of it because they've changed. I know when I first started studying Course in Miracles, I was reading a chapter or reading a part of the book and was highlighting, oh, that's good. That's good. That's good. And then I went back a year or so later and read that same stuff and couldn't figure out why I highlighted it. We're the ones that are constantly changing, and life is that kind of spiral. And so when things come back around, welcome them and know that you're probably going to grieve something, but that's just part of the learning process. It's part of the growth process. But if you are getting something new out of it, then know that you've grown. So many people get stuck into,
Mhm.
especially guys, we get stuck in that. Why is this happening again? I already dealt with this. Why is this coming back around again? Well, God, why are you forsaking me? Why am I doing this again? Well,
Mhm.
there's still more to learn. There's still more
Mhm.
growth to have. And so just accept the fact that grief and the 5 stages of grief will be a part of your life. Don't avoid it,
Yeah.
accept it. And the more you accept it, the more resilient you become and the quicker you can get to
Mhm.
acceptance.
You know, I mean, and again, the main thing that is so heavy on my heart now at this exact moment is just the reality that we're all, every single one of us, man, we don't get to opt out of loss in life. We don't get to opt out of grief. We don't get to opt out of the experience. And that experience is going to be some ups and it's going to be some downs, man. You're going to have some days that are just going to outright suck. You're going to have some days that, is probably up to that point going to be the worst day of your life, or feel like it anyway. And then some days that are going to be, the best day of your life. And a whole lot of days in between that are going to be a mix of somewhere on the paradigm of one to the other, but we got to be able to experience those things. And the most important thing, man, the most important thing that I would love for guys in general specifically to latch on to is all of those things that happen, the ups and the downs, the ebbs and the flows, the waves that come in, like the North Shore of Hawaii, man. You don't do those alone. Like you can't do those alone. You shouldn't do those alone. When you try to do those alone, you're probably not gonna succeed in terms of riding that wave the best that you can. Sometimes when you crash on that wave, you need somebody to zoom in with a wave runner and a wakeboard behind it and lets you jump on it and get out of there. Whatever the metaphor is, but we can't do this thing alone, man. We got to be able to live life together as men, supporting each other, walking through these things with each other, and holding each other up, holding space for each other, and being with each other when we need it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's why you need a group of guys. And if you're the guy that's in it, stop feeling like you can't talk to nobody, you don't want to burden anybody. And I'm speaking from experience.
Mhm.
I spent 40 years plus doing that and just sucking it all up and being like I can handle it, but always being there for everybody else. You don't understand the gift you give somebody, especially somebody who cares about you, one of your buddies, the gift that you give them to be there to support you. Because all of us men, we're there to fix, we're there to support. It's in our DNA, it's who we are. We're there for the family, we're there for the kids, we're there for the community. And if you don't allow that weakness out, if you don't allow that grief out, and you don't allow somebody to be there to support you, then not only are you suffering, but they're suffering as well because they don't get to lend that helping hand. The old saying, a friend in need is a friend indeed, is very true. I mean, it's kind of trite and people kind of laugh at it, but if you're in need and you reach out to one of your buddies and he's there for you, you're doing him a favor because now he feels useful, he feels impactful, he feels like he has purpose in the world. And maybe the two of you need each other because you're trying to do this all on your own, you're white knuckling it, and you're both, starting to have heart issues and drug issues and drinking too much and all these things. Reach out and be brave. I mean, this is the biggest challenge that we give all of our guys. Be brave enough to acknowledge and be present with the fact that you're in grief, you have emotions, you're a human being, and share that with somebody else because
Mhm.
that's all we can do. we can be here to support each other and share what we're going through. You're not an island. You're not doing this on your own. All men are doing the same things. The only difference between one man and another is time and circumstance. And right now, maybe it's your time. Next time, it'll be his time. But we can always take that opportunity to be present with another man.
Yeah. Even in death, even a dead man needs six other men to carry him where he needs to go. You know, and that's in death. In life, you need men around you to carry you sometimes where you need to go, where you need to get to. And when you're experiencing loss, when you're experiencing just the grief cycle, when you're experiencing the ups and the downs in life, man, you know, you can't get there on your own. And you're going to need sometimes some people to help carry you where you need to go. And like I said, if nothing else, death is a metaphor for life in that kind of way. We shouldn't wait till we die to allow or have six other men carry us sometimes when we need to be carried. So we ought to live in that way passionately. We ought to live that way publicly, and with purpose. And that's absolutely the way that we should live. So,
Yeah. We
you
want to
mind
make
if I
sure
land
as
this plane?
men, we make sure we give other men their flowers before they're in the ground.
Yeah.
We want to make sure we
Yeah.
give
Oh,
them
yeah.
the opportunity, to flourish and to flower and to be emotive and to be a man before they're in the ground. It's time for us to,
Yeah.
start acknowledging that. And while
Absolutely.
we acknowledge that, I want to say Happy Memorial Day coming up and Happy Father's Day after that. And then until next time, we are the Mad Men of Masculinity. This is KLDC, and we are
Out.
out.